Hey guys, first Regardsman here, and today I brought on Revan619, an Owlcat content creator for both Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy, to talk about their new game, Dark Heresy, with me. So what is up, Revan? How do you feel about Owlcat's new release, their new CRPG that's supposed to be their direct response to the success of Larian Studios and Baldur's Gate 3?
Well, obviously, we've only seen the open alpha so far. If anyone wants to join us, that you can buy directly through Owlcat's website or just wait till it's out. Predictions are going to be that it's going to be out November time, maybe December this year. And whilst I don't quite think it's going to be the heights of Baldur's Gate 3, I would like to see it try to rival, say, Divinity Original Sin 2.
That's a pretty good goalpost for them because Baldur's Gate 3 was just an enormous game. I really think it's kind of insane that they could properly reach that level, at least in terms of like popularity of the 40k game. But they are making some pretty huge strides like voice acting, a more limited location for the story, adding in more popular factions to make it more accessible for more players, especially 40k fans. And I think, yeah, Divinity 2 is a pretty good example because, like we talked about before we actually even started this, that Divinity 2 is a pretty comparable game in some of the mechanics of this one, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of the mechanics are taking inspiration from there. Like, I know some people are worried that they're going to go for more of a Divinity Original Sin 2 armor system, which they are, but they're not doing two split armor pools. So they're only going to have sort of the one set of armor, which is going to be like over health, but there are going to be ways to bypass and ignore it, and it won't prevent stun, but it will prevent additional vital damage, which is their new mechanic for extra health damage.
Now, from what you've played so far, do you think the combat's going to be accessible to players? I feel like a lot of players ended up playing Rogue Trader especially. They were worried like, oh my god, this is so complicated to me, I don't know what to do. Obviously, your build guides on your channel help people tremendously with that, me included. And I think that you're obviously going to do the same thing for Dark Heresy. But as far as the base game mechanics go, do you think this game is more accessible for new players over Rogue Trader? Do you think like the new voice acting will help out with that and the overall mechanics of the game?
Yeah, I do. It's been simplified, but in a good way. So the cover system's more apparent. The armor system's more apparent. The roles for every companion is more obvious. The roles for each of the archetypes is more obvious. It's much easier to focus the different play styles, and all the weapons have much more defined roles, whereas a lot of weapons in Rogue Trader were just endless trash that all just did the same as something else but worse. Whereas Dark Heresy, like, las weapons are clear, they do more damage against armor. Melters do more damage against armor. Flamers bypass cover, whereas the heavy damage burst weapons, they don't ignore armor. They don't ignore cover, so they actually have to get through that. So whilst the flame might be weaker, it'll be more likely to get damage on those enemies quicker. So there's a lot more roles coming to it, and they've like vastly buffed precision weapons like sniper rifles, swords, so they actually have more of a role themselves. So you'll find that you specialize a lot more of the archetype. So it does look like it's been simplified in a good way because you don't get an access to thousands of talents right away. Instead, you just get your basic archetype, which will only have a handful. Then you'll have your subclass style systems, which have a small handful. And as you level up and you get access to new of these subclasses, which you choose, that will then give you another small handful of talents, so you won't be overwhelmed right at the start.
Now, we talked about in our Rogue Trader video that one of the big things that was missing from Rogue Trader was like a super powerful melee hybrid class, like the fundamental aspect of 40k for like a lot of tabletop factions and stuff like that, especially for Imperium factions. And do you feel like Dark Heresy has fixed that? Do you feel like the proper melee hybrid is going to be there? Because we talked about Rogue Trader didn't really fix that for a while into its game's life cycle.
Well, I think the specialization system that I just talked about, those extra subclasses that come in, that could be the way to do it. In the alpha test, they didn't have anything that directly showed that, but some of the clever clogs that were doing some of the code diving did find other origins, which did give bonuses to being a mixed attacker, which was specifically a Rogue Trader origin. So hopefully they are going to look to that, and I've made it a big point with Owlcat and some of their higher ups that this is something you need to consider because it is the identity of Warhammer 40k.
I definitely agree that capturing the essence of 40k is fundamental to both Rogue Trader and the upcoming Dark Heresy. Really, Owlcat has done a great job at making sure players understand the portion of the universe they're in. 40k is so big sometimes that kind of pigeonholing the player into like one portion of it is just a way better way to just like understand it. Space Marine 2 did that. Space Marine 3 will likely do that as well. And even though these games are obviously much larger scale than that, having the fundamental essence of the universe be kept intact as you basically just walk the player through these various Xenos factions, because there are a ton in Rogue Trader, and there'll be a ton in Dark Heresy as well, even like the smaller scale of one planet. I think it's a very important thing to do. I'm glad they are making sure they're going to be doing that more in this one, even over Rogue Trader. Now, as far as what you think, do you think this game will pull in new fans for 40K? Do you think this is like a big jumping off point for a lot of players? I think Rogue Trader did a pretty good job at this. I mean, I was already a huge 40K fan before I played Rogue Trader, so like a lot of it wasn't hugely new to me, but I did learn some new things, and hopefully Dark Heresy will do that for new players. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I hope it does, because I last played Warhammer Tabletop in 3rd edition, which was a very long time ago. So when Space Marine 2 came out and Rogue Trader come out not long before, I was looking to sort of get back into the hobby, but I didn't really want to sit and go through lore videos. So I kind of jumped straight into Rogue Trader, and it was very good at teaching me stuff about the universe. So I actually managed to get all up to date on things I didn't know about, because maybe someone who's plays Space Marine, they don't even know what a navigator is or
True.
something like that. And the built-in encyclopedia that comes up in the text dialogue is very good for doing that. And you're more likely to get new players with the fact that this game has full voice acting and it's going to have slightly updated graphics. I feel like they're still going to be somewhat behind, because obviously they're on quite an outdated engine using Unity, so it's not going to have that visual appeal a lot of people would want to see if like trying a CRPG for the first time. And Owlcat, whilst they're very good at introducing people to Warhammer, they're not very good at introducing people to CRPGs, because one of the reasons my channel exists is because the reason the Rogue Trade experience is so good is it's designed by people who like CRPGs, it's designed by people who like Warhammer, but they make the mistake of assuming people know how to play CRPGs, so the tutorials are non-existent, the mechanic explanations are non-existent, and you can find that information, but at times it will often be wrong. And I'm hoping that they will add a proper tutorial for Dark Heresy where it explains what these mechanics does. It explains how to level up, so you don't feel like you're 50 hours in and you made a mistake in your build 40 hours ago and you can't fix it. So I hope there's going to be a little bit more focus there, because I'm confident Owlcat will teach people about the universe. I'm not confident they'll teach people about CRPGs.
I mean, that's a great point that Owlcat isn't like super good at introducing people to CRPGs. I love Rogue Trader, but pretty much every single Owlcat game going back as far as like Pathfinder just has a ridiculous amount of jank to it in some degree. And it is really hard to get people to CRPGs in general. Baldur's Gate 3 is like the only one I can think that like really did a phenomenal job of just capturing a casual market and pulling them into a CRPG, which Baldur's Gate 3 isn't that complicated at all, but it's more complicated than a lot of casual games you'd see usually. Obviously, Owlcat is probably not going to capture that same audience, but Rogue Trader, when you load up that game, despite the fact I think the tutorial in Rogue Trader is pretty decent, like where you go through to kill the chaos spawn, stuff like that, you have to like learn the fundamental mechanics of the game. Dark Heresy, it's pretty good for that. Not as good as Baldur's Gate 3 in the sense that you're not going to encapsulate these new players to come play CRPGs. I think it's getting better. I think the biggest blockade beyond just leveling in CRPGs is, of course, the dialogue. Fully voice acted characters is hugely important for a lot of people. The number one complaint I've ever seen about Rogue Trader is players will say like, oh, I loaded it up, I saw an absolute book of dialogue in front of me, and I closed the game down because I just got exhausted reading it, which is, something like, oh, they're dumb, they can't read books. But like some people, they'll come back home, they'll want to play a game, and they don't want to read an entire, dissertation from a character in that game they're playing. So it is a fundamentally niche market they're going to be capturing when you don't have voice acting in your game, which for me, I don't really mind, but I know that what I enjoy in a game is not the same for everybody. And I think that the fact that Owlcat is moving towards more voice acting, capturing a more casual audience, that is good for CRPGs. I think Baldur's Gate 3 made a great stride in showing other companies that it can be done. And I hope that Owlcat retains that level of roleplay they have, despite this voice acting they have now, because that was a big issue a lot of players have brought up as well, is that, okay, we're sacrificing our roleplay opportunities in our CRPG because we're adding in fully voice acted dialogue, which for me is a give and take, and I do prefer voice acting in a lot of things, but what's your opinion on that?
Well, the good news, and it does remain to be seen if it is true, Owlcat said that they're not planning to roll back their book at all. Like, this is going to be as thick of a book as Rogue Trader was, but we are going to have full voice acting. So I pity the amount of work those voice actors are going to have to do. It's going to be a bit of a shame that we're not going to have a narrator, because I know Baldur's Gate 3 made a big thing about their narrator, and I actually thought when I originally did the interview with Starrick and Alcat and Slandered Gaming that when they said they didn't have narrator, I didn't think it was a big deal. But I was looking at the other Pathfinder spin-off, Afterlight, which is currently in Kickstarter, and they're basically bringing in Arthur Morgan to be their narrator. And I was watching their demo for that, the new games show, and I could just hear Arthur Morgan narrating the scene. I was like, oh, that's so good. I wish we had something like that coming in Dark Heresy.
That's a great point. The narrator, I didn't even really think about that. That yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 had a very memorable narrator compared to most games you see. I haven't really seen one like that since what was it? Maybe Fez way back when. I might think of like a different platformer, but either way, it is a great point to make that narrators do help out because like that is what you're with 90% of a CRPG. Because for players who are unaware, you aren't always interacting with characters in CRPGs. A lot of the time you're like reading book descriptions, you're investigating items and stuff like that. So having a narrator to read that out to you with like a certain type of charm can help out a ton in the player immersion, just like the general player experience and accessibility of the game. The fact that you said they're not going to be slowing down their book at all, I do pity the voice actors for that. I'm sure they had to hire a ton for this, and they don't have to deal with the motion capture that Baldur's Gate 3 did, but still, the fact that they're really making a step forward to do that without pulling back their roleplay opportunities, it could be like the best voice-acted role-playing game for CRPG ever, if that's true, because I think Rogue Trader had phenomenal dialogue. I think it had phenomenal options and gameplay opportunities for you to express what you want your character to be. And Baldur's Gate 3 was okay at that, but I think they did sacrifice some of that roleplay opportunity to give you those fully voice acted characters and to basically force you into certain paths, because at a certain point, when you have that much dialogue and all that mocap and you're trying to like bring all these characters to life, it becomes impossible to have like 19-page essays on every single character's backstory given to you like every other character pretty much. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, well, they did say they're actually trying to expand the roleplay. They want your dialogue and your options and your choices to actually have more impact on the game. So the conviction system wasn't as deep as it was originally planned to be in Rogue Trader. For Dark Heresy, they said they are planning to make your decisions more important. So decisions and what you do will actually change the world state of the next area. So if you do something to save all these people, then the next area might have these saved peoples, or it might be flooded with refugees because that's the only place they've got to go next, or maybe you didn't stop a cataclysm, so the next area is going to be absolutely devastated. So their plan was to make the game wider and be more focused by having it on one world, so you can see more impact and choice and consequence.
That is the benefit of having a smaller stage for your characters, like the entire campaign. Rogue Trader obviously takes place across the entirety of the Chronos Expanse, and in Dark Heresy, you're on one planet, so being able to change the areas on one planet is a lot easier to do, and you'll feel a lot more intimate with the characters. They pull it off properly. I didn't really mind it in Rogue Trader, to be honest. I think Rogue Trader did a pretty damn good job of changing areas, or like at least making my choices feel interactive. I guess the major changes would come to Footfall, which is like the major area you hung around as like the hub. But as far as area changes go, that is good to hear. They're really focusing on that in Dark Heresy, because in Rogue Trader, I thought it was pretty decent, though most of the major changes in that game were character related. Like, okay, did you bring Heinrich to go do this, or like Heinrich to go do this, or did you let him interact with the demon computer and stuff like that? And I think that was a pretty good job. But if they do that for both characters and location, I mean, the game's pretty phenomenal.
Well, here's something I found out to do about Rogue Trader. And I've got over 1,300 hours. I hadn't noticed it before. Your ship can change based on your alignment as you progress through the game.
Yes.
At higher alignments, did you know Dargonis does the same?
Dargonis of what?
The capital planet. If in Act 4, when you've pretty much maxed out your conviction, if you go back to Dargonis, the actual state of the planet will reflect your conviction.
That's pretty sick. I've never actually noticed that at all in my playthroughs. Now,
it's because you don't have a reason to go back.
It's true. Yeah, Dargonis, I think like I visited like twice my whole playthrough, as far as I remember, for the first one.
Yeah, originally it was meant to actually have storylines based on your convictions, but they had to unfortunately cut it due to constraints. So I've still got hope that maybe they'll expand that in a later update.
I mean, I assume that they'll keep. I assume that they will keep updating Rogue Trader once Dark Heresy is out. Owlcat pretty much never abandons games, even as far back as Pathfinder here. They still give out updates for that game occasionally. It just came out like the last one very recently. And as far as Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader are concerned, I think they're going to be supporting both of these games for like the next 5+ years easily. Because, I mean, Owlcat's a pretty dedicated dev when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I do think we probably see expansions like you said, to Rogue Trader in regards to the endgame acts, because the later acts of Rogue Trader are notoriously undercooked. And hopefully that's not the case in Dark Heresy. But as far as what you've seen of the story of Dark Heresy, do you feel like the game will enrapture players? Do you think the story is going to be as good as Road Trader?
I do think the story is going to be more engaging. One of the complaints that I had about Rogue Trader is some of the main narrative elements feel like they get a little bit lost. Like in the tutorial of Rogue Trader, you meet a character called Kunrad who starts off the whole events of the game, and it leads to the whole thing that sets you off into Act 1. He disappears and he comes back in Act 4, and he's like, "Oh, you took everything from me, and now I'm summoning demons." I'm just, I had that Thanos moment. Like, I don't even know who you are. Like, what are you talking about? But because of that, I did feel like the story is a bit disjointed in Rogue Trader, whereas Dark Heresy, because of the investigation systems, it's going to be a lot more focused. You have that big overarching plot from the start. It's the effects of the Tyrant Star. You deal with it in the prologue. The first act is about trying to deal with the aftermath of it, and then hopefully the other acts will be slowly you investigating it and moving to find out more about what's going on with them, what the Night Lords are up to, why they're here when this has suddenly happened. So I think by having that central theme that's going to run throughout, it's going to be a lot more concise, because like I said, Rogue Trader there was a mutiny in the prologue, and then some reason there was a different mutiny on a planet, and then the Drukhari show up, and then you're trying to fix the mistakes of your predecessors' administration for some reason, and then the Drukhari show up again, and then the Drukhari kidnap you, and you're like, what's going on here? And then suddenly you come back, and then Chaos show up, and then you're like, okay, let's deal with Chaos. Then the Necrons show. You're like, what? Why do these things keep showing up? Like, none of this feels connected.
True.
And it is all connected, and it all gets revealed like within the last 10 minutes, and the main villain monologues off and explains why it's all connected. You're like, okay, that's decent, but I wish I understood that running up to this point. But apparently DLC 3 is going to connect it a little bit more and explain a lot more of what happened in the events leading up to the game, and more of the backstory of the villain.
Yeah, I would say in Rogue Trader, they did a pretty good job of connecting all the dots at the very end. It does make a lot of sense. You can look back, you can piece it all together, and be like, oh, that's why everything happened.
Oh yeah, there is so much foreshadowing on a second playthrough. You're like, oh, that makes so much more sense now.
But I think like the most disjointed plot in that game was probably the Word Bearer's plot than summoning a demon, because like it is just their own thing in that game for the most part. The whole call to the Final Dawn and stuff like that. It's it is the most disjointed plot in my opinion. But as far as like everything, it still fits into the game, because like obviously they would be doing stuff like that. They are trying to bring back a demon basically. But no, spoiler alert, Lord changed. But the point is that there's a disjointed plot there with the
That is connected to the main plot as well. Basically, they tried to latch on to the main plot, and there's a Zinchian plot to kind of take it over. So it is connected, but it just doesn't feel like it is.
Yeah, it's hard for people to like when you play Rogue Trader the first time, you're like, okay, why are there just word bearers here? This is like a bunch of Chaos Space Marines, and it is connected. Like the Cult of the Final Dawn is connected for sure. But as far as having like the general plot, they are just their own faction doing their own thing. They're like, okay, we want to like hijack this basically. So like, that is their plan. That's very word bearer like in general, and like very Chaos Space Marine like. I think Night Lords will be a little more involved in Dark Heresy, where like they are in the nitty gritty of the major story. But like once again, it's one planet, so it's pretty easy to like have these factions just run into each other all the time. Because Rogue Trader, despite the fact that I think that Rogue Traders are probably one of the best main characters you could play as in a CRPG, because you have access to Xenos factions, you have access to like ridiculous amounts of wealth, a retinue, and all that. It all makes perfect sense. There's a reason they were on a tabletop game already. I do think that an Inquisitor is a wonderful choice as well. The Inquisition being at the forefront of a game doesn't happen too often. I don't think we've ever done it for like RP outside of some things in tabletop, but it is pretty fun, and I think it's a great choice.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you've played the game Inquisitor, but a bit janky now, but it is a good game, and I definitely agree, because the problem with Rogue Trader, if you don't know the Warhammer lore, you don't know that is how the game started. If you just think it's something called Rogue Trader, you don't know what that is, and it's not as inspiring as Dark Heresy, knowing that you're an Inquisitor. People know what that is, even who don't know Warhammer. They know that these guys are kind of badass. So I think it will just sell better based on that. And then yes, you do open yourself up to having a lot more power in a different sense. Whereas Rogue Traders essentially space quadrillionaires that own sections of the universe, they don't want to cross the Inquisition, whilst the Inquisition can't order them because they literally have a piece of paper that says from the Emperor, I do what the fuck I want. You're not going to mess with the Inquisition. The same way the Inquisition can't order Astartes around. There's only one faction of the Astartes that are kind of willing to tell them to go F themselves, and that was the Space Wolves, which is funny enough a plot in Rogue Trader. So, but yeah, I think it's going to be very fun to obviously go up through the ranks, get access to privileged technology and other things that even a Rogue Trader would be frowned upon, because obviously you're going to have your Radical who's going to be going into Xenos tech and doing all sorts of who knows what. Some people were even suspecting maybe a companion might be a demon host, because they said they've already spoiled that there's going to be a companion unlike we've ever seen. So potentially they could do something like that. Or you could have a Puritan who's just like purging all the potential Xenos companions, purging anyone who even interacts with them, and both paths are going to be perfectly viable.
A demon host companion would be crazy. Now,
yeah,
I am curious, to somebody that has never played Dark Heresy, they don't know anything about it, what would you say somebody coming over from Rogue Trader is the biggest difference between these two games?
Well, whilst they are somewhat limiting buffs and extra turns, because they're taking away Daring Breach, they're taking away Finest Hour, but they are keeping Bring It Down, and they are changing some of the buff abilities for Officer to be later abilities that you can enhance. They're still going to be heavily present. Instead of manipulating momentum, we're going to be manipulating ally morale to be generating lots of extra turns and heroic acts, which are going to be your big all or nothing moments. So the other thing to keep an eye on for people that are going to be transitioning over is, like you said at the start of the video, Rogue Trader pigeons you whole into using Argenta because she will just clear half the map by pointing her gun in that direction. And her burst fire is the best AoE weapon, it's the best single target weapon, it's the best trash kill weapon, it's the best boss killer weapon. However, burst fire in Dark Heresy, they appear to be trying to balance it by making it a single target ability that will sometimes miss and hit other things within that sort of 3-cell radius that we're more familiar are. So if you've got a big pack of enemies, chances are you might only kill one of them or even 2 extras by accident. So you're not going to be the be-all end-all just by making burst soldiers like you were in Rogue Trader.
Now, that being said, how is the Operative now? Because we talked about the Officer for a little bit there. Do you think the Operative that was previously the worst class in Rogue Trader, the worst archetype, do you think it's better in Dark Heresy? Do you think it's improved a lot, or do you think it's going to be in the same slump?
Well, they've reworked the way precision weapons like sniper rifles work, and with items that do vital damage, once you've bypassed armor, sniper rifles do some obscene damage. The highest burst fire I managed to get was 400, but a lot of those shots missed, so I was technically doing 100 to 200, whereas I had a 750 plus single target shot on an operative. And at first that sounds like, oh my god, it's finally the single shot king that was meant to be, like it was in launch of Rogue Trader. But in that scenario, I'm not actually using many, if any, operative mechanics. So I'm hoping that they still balance it a little bit more, because you can put a sniper rifle and officer, give them the same vital points gear, and you'll do 500 plus damage on a single sniper shot. However, the operative stuff, it didn't impress me very much. It was adding very little, but if they keep working with it, so it's going to be more of a precision target killing style, which seems to be what they were first experimenting with in this, I do think it is going to have a very good version of it compared to Rogue Trader, where it just kind of does nothing, even though it's meant to be the single target killer. Whereas if they could make it viable to be able to be the single target killer and not just feel like you only take one shot a turn, then I think it will be in a much better place.
Now, speaking of the term viable, do you think that the class archetypes are all viable for the hardest difficulty right now? Way back when, I saw somebody talk about Baldur's Gate 3. It's like one of the best solutions, or one of the greatest things that game did for the gameplay loop was that pretty much all the class archetypes were viable in Baldur's Gate 3 to some extent on the hardest difficulty. That was a hard thing to pull off. I think part of that is because Baldur's Gate 3 is a pretty easy game, but you feel like Rogue Trader or Dark Heresy, they do that pretty well in like their recent patches and the upcoming release.
Well, yeah, Rogue Trader definitely is doing that well because even at the moment, my current Unfair Grim Dark live stream, which is Rogue Trader's Iron Man mode, I'm using an Operative Gunslinger. Operative is not designed to use dual pistols at all, but I'm finding a way to make it work. So there is a lot of creativity in the builds, but how the game is meant to be played by the way they've designed it, it doesn't support Operative as being a quote unquote viable highest tier archetype. Whereas so far in Dark Heresy, everything does feel viable, and like I said, everything feels like it has a role. Operative feels very strong for taking out the boss. Soldier feels very good for holding off all the enemies trying to push you whilst you're preparing and your support. Some of the other stuff Soldier's really good at is using areas to interrupt enemy hold actions, because they've introduced a new mechanic where they can set up interactions that if you don't prevent before they go off will really mess over your team plan. Officers are still just as broken as they were in Rogue Trader, but they don't feel as unfairly broken. Whilst they are high impact, I don't feel like this one archetype is carrying the entire battle to one turn so far, but we are only seeing up to like level 7, level 8. So I hope that they continue that, and I hope that with their roadmap for Rogue Trader, they are mentioning they are looking at adding more of a challenge to people playing on higher difficulties. So I'm hoping 1.6 might rework some of the weaker stuff like they did with plasma guns in 1.5 and some of the origins. And maybe because we're not getting a new archetype with the next DLC for Rogue Trader, that they will look at those other origins they didn't buff and the other archetypes that are slightly behind.
The officer, I feel like that class was pretty damn overpowered in Rogue Trader. Definitely the most of like the initial launch of the game when basically just one turned everything. It still kind of does that. I mean, getting extra turns in a game like that, breaking the action economy of any turn-based game is just going to fundamentally be like that to some extent, which is like a massive downside for that action gain. But I feel like as long as these class archetypes don't pull away from your experience as a player, if you're still able to engage in the mechanics of the game, because that's the real issue, right? When you have a archetype that is so overblown, so overpowered, that basically trivializes the entire experience, you don't actually get to experience a combat loop at all, that's when a game becomes boring for me personally in tabletop and like any turn-based game. And I feel like if they're trying to address that, it's a great thing. Now, the thing I want to ask you here as a final question would be, do you think, or what do you think is the biggest problem with this game currently? What do you think the biggest issue with Dark Heresy is going into the launch?
What would I say is the big... Now, one of the things that I kind of don't like is how they're currently doing vendor reputation. So when you look at the vendor shop, you can see what all their best items are, and you can see that you can only be sold them whether or not they like you or they dislike you, and you can raise up the 2 different ability bars by it. Now, if I know for the build that I want to play that the best items that I need for this build require me to min-max my relationships with these certain vendors, normally that doesn't bother me, except in Dark Heresy, it very clearly impacts the story. So in the early parts of the alpha, you do interact with the Mechanicus, and the Mechanicus are one of the vendors. Now, if I wanted the best plasma rifle in the game, I have to be very nice to them. So obviously, okay, this is going to be my good guy playthrough. But the heavy bolter that I wanted meant I had to be horrible to a different faction, but they were actually still on the same side as Mechanicus. So it's like, okay, well, this is going to be weird. So I'm going to be playing a good guy, but dickhead to some of the good guys. But vice versa. Say I wanted the opposite items, that means that how I now have to play through it is also still limited. Say I wanted the best items for being horrible to Mechanicus, I might just burn down the entire Mechanicus facility, not do any of that quest line, which could have massive impacts, but it was the only way they would then sell me the item I wanted. So I kind of don't like that too much, whereas Rogue Trader's reputation system it was just about selling loot to them. They liked you based on how much loot you sold them.
Reputation systems in games like CRPGs is always pretty hard to pull off, I feel. It kind of inherently pigeonholes you into certain play styles depending on what the actual rewards for having that faction rep actually are. And that's always been an issue I've had like games way beyond just Allocat stuff. Like you said in Rogue Trader, you basically just had to sell stuff to these guys, but at a certain point, it was kind of hard to like max out your faction reputation, and certain items it did require you to be like a good guy, and some of those were just way stronger than others, like, you know, Iconoclast, like level 4, like level 3 for some of the helmets in the game were just like super powerful, or if I remember that correctly. But either way, having this faction rep, having your character's general alignment, I feel like that's a bit of a limiting factor in all CRPGs and RPGs in general. Like, I've actually seen them pop up, and it's a hard thing to do. You do want to reward people for playing a certain way, but limiting builds based on how your RP is concerned, that's always been a problem I've had. So that seems to be an issue too.
Yeah, I agree. I hope they find a different way to balance it. Like, I like the idea of doing good feats for a faction will get you more rewards from them, but I still don't understand why they sell you better stuff if they hate you. That's kind of where it makes no sense to me. But no, I have good faith in them. Like, they build the game with the intention to play it themselves, and you can tell that. So that's why the experience is always very good, even if the learning curve can sometimes be abysmal for someone new to the sort of genre of games.
A learning curve in a game like this can always be a hugely limiting factor, but hopefully they can mitigate that with their tutorial, and if they can't, Revan definitely will, because you guys should definitely subscribe to Revan619's channel, probably one of the best CRP channels on the entire platform currently. Amazing guides, really likable guy, and thank you for coming on and talking about this with me.
Oh no, thank you very much for having me. It's been great going over and discussing stuff about their upcoming games. Like I said, hopefully it'll be out later in the year. If you don't really want to just be a bug tester, then I wouldn't recommend buying the $70 versions to get into the alpha early. But if you do want to do that and then also get into the beta, because they'll be live until those games go live, then it is an option you can do. But obviously make an informed decision based on your own bank account.
I will put a link to where you can buy the Dark Heresy game in the description below. And if you guys like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thank you for watching. Take it easy. Bye.